Never been warned like this before, all of us, about climate change, nor have so many countries agreed quite this much on the clear and present danger it represents. Here is the takeaway. Unless the world changes course quickly and dramatically, the fundamental systems that support human civilization are at risk.
Hundreds of scientists saying tonight it is visual proof of global warming and what we all have to do next. ABC's Dan Harris with today's big announcement.
The head of the World Bank is warning that climate change will lead to violent conflict over shortages of food and water.
The new UN report on climate change is full of serious warnings and predictions of what's to come.
Intense heat waves that feed fires, wiping out forests and homes. Prolonged droughts that damage food and water supplies for billions of people, and sharply higher costs for farmers, consumers, and businesses alike. It's all laid out in today's report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
What on earth is going on?
Unless we act dramatically and quickly, he said, science tells us our climate and our way of life are literally in jeopardy.
Rising sea levels are making storm surges more deadly. Wildfires and heat waves are more intense. Glaciers are shrinking.
In fact, anybody who eats is under threat from climate change.
Oppenheimer says yields of two crucial crops, wheat and corn, are decreasing because of the changing climate. But if nothing is done, the report warns snowpacks in the American West will continue to shrink, causing water shortages and worsening droughts. And the record-breaking heat of 2012 could become routine.
We're likely to see most summers being hotter than the historically hottest summer.
And these changes are picking up speed, affecting food and water supplies, human health, and the loss of global species. The scientists say no one and no place will be immune.
Polls last year by the Pew Research Center found more than 2/3 of Americans believe the Earth is getting warmer.
It's about the softness of their bodies and the hardness of the glacier and how this glacier is weakening.
I do believe in climate change.
There's something going on, the climate is changing.
I think it's impossible not to believe in climate change when you see the devastation that's going on around the world.
We're already experiencing climate change. We know that the worst is yet to come. And these aren't far distant impacts, you know. We're talking about an ice-free Arctic in the next sort of 4 to 5 years. That could have devastating consequences for the entire planet and fundamentally alter life for humans.
If the world doesn't make big changes soon, by the year 2040, we could very well have released enough greenhouse gases that we will have locked in a global temperature rise of 3.6 degrees, which is where potentially irreversible and catastrophic changes kick in.
Arctic temperatures increased almost twice the global average rate in the past 100 years. There have been more intense droughts over wider areas, especially in the tropics. There's been less snow, fewer cold days and nights, and more killer heat waves. And the future, if we don't curb gas emissions, will only get worse.
If we keep emitting greenhouse gases at current rates, we'll see bigger changes in this current century than we did in the last century.
They estimate temperatures could rise between 3.5 and 8 degrees, and sea levels rise between 7 to 23 inches.
It would also have wider security and stability implications.
This is NBC News Digest, sponsored by Michelob Light. Here is Jessica Savage, NBC News.
And finally, a federal report today predicted possible catastrophic warming of the Earth by the 1990s with the strong climate change. I'm Jessica Savage in New York. More news later on this NBC station.
If the world doesn't make big changes soon, by the year 2040, we could very well have released enough greenhouse gases that we will have locked in a global temperature rise of 3.6 degrees, which is where potentially irreversible and catastrophic changes kick in.
Catastrophic warming of the Earth by the 1990s with the strong climate change.
Lying to the public about how devastating the effects of global warming or climate change will be is of course a very precarious and difficult lie to get correct. You have to make the threat to human preservation immediate enough to scare the population into thinking they will personally be affected, while simultaneously making sure the range of time is long enough so the public will forget and forgive if you are incorrect in your dire prognostications. It appears the elite and media have decided on a range of 2 to 3 decades in order to properly scare the public while not being caught in their own lies. The enormous mistake that NBC News made with their 1983 report from Jessica Savage was to claim that by the 1990s there would be catastrophic changes. Of course, these catastrophic changes never occurred, so the public is left wondering why they are being told misinformation. It is important to keep the range of time long enough so the public's short-term memory can be completely erased, while simultaneously making sure the public is aware of their own self-preservation and is worried that their lives will be affected. If the period of time is beyond one's own lifespan, it is highly likely that they will not care about the subject matter and will not give in to the agenda.
In 1977, the worst winter in a century struck the United States.
I think we'd have to think about moving someplace else.
Move where? The brutal buffalo winter might become common all over the United States. Climate experts believe the next ice age is on its way. According to recent evidence, it could come sooner than anyone had expected. At weather stations in the far north, temperatures have been dropping for 30 years. Seacoasts, long free of summer ice, are now blocked year-round. According to some climatologists, within a lifetime, we might be living in the next ice age. Our planet is crowded. What will we do when the fragile balance of climate shifts from today's abnormal warmth and the next ice age begins? What can we do to stop it? Nuclear energy might be used to loosen polar ice caps. Sea ice could be melted by covering it with black soot to increase the absorption of sunlight. Dr. Stephen Schneider is a climatologist from the National Center for Atmospheric Research.
Can we do these things? Yes. But will they make things better? I'm not sure. We can't predict with any certainty what's happening to our own climatic future. How can we come along and intervene then in that ignorance? You could melt the ice caps. What would that do to the coastal cities? The cure could be worse than the disease. Would that be better or worse than the risk of an ice age?
If we are unprepared for the next advance, the result could be hunger and death on a scale unprecedented in all of history. What scientists are telling us now is that the threat of an ice age is not as remote as they once thought. During the lifetime of our grandchildren, Arctic cold and perpetual snow could turn most of the inhabitable portions of our planet into a polar desert.
And they'll push again, and I'll say to them, read my lips. No new taxes.
You know, it also explains why there are even more British people now who believe that global warming is a scam and it's a way to raise taxes and exert control.
Every government in the world agreed that if we do not take action, more action, we will not be able to prevent world temperatures rising by more than 2 degrees centigrade. What does the honourable gentleman know that the rest of the world does not?
Well, Chris, I mean, you're actually giving it away. You're giving the game away there, because what you're saying is about world governments, politicians. We're talking about scientists here. Now, science is a slow process. Evidence has to be studied and deciphered. But politics is a quicker game. And politics is running ahead of the science. That is where the problem lies. And the fact of the matter is that the globe actually isn't warming. It hasn't warmed since 1998. So, I mean, the game's up. People are finding it out. You've got a problem, and what you're doing is you're conning people, and it's a scam, and the people are finding you out.
The startling reality of climate change is the climate has always changed on Earth. It has never remained the same temperature. This is a completely natural process which should not alarm anyone. What the elite running the media are attempting to do is scare the population into a complete panic when what we are experiencing are completely normal and natural cycles.
Climates have always changed. Climate changes in the past have been greater and faster than anything we experience in our lifetime. And sea levels have always changed. Not by the modest couple of millimetres that people are having conniptions about, but we've had in the past sea level changes of only 1,500 metres. That's a sea level change. And if we look back in the history of time, the atmosphere once had a very large amount of carbon dioxide in it. It's now got less than 0.04%. Carbon dioxide is a natural gas. It has dominated the atmosphere for an extraordinarily long period of time, and we now are at a dangerously low level. If we halved the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, we would have no terrestrial plants. Carbon dioxide is plant food. It is not a pollutant. But for less than 20% of time, we have had ice on planet Earth. The rest of the time, it's been warmer and wetter. And there's been more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And what did life do? It thrived. 6 of the 6 great ice ages were initiated when the carbon dioxide content of the atmosphere was higher than now. In fact, up to 1,000 times higher. For some odd reason, the major driver of climate is that great ball of heat in the sky, which we call the sun. You heard it here first. It's really quite unusual. And we change our distance from the sun. Every 100,000 years, our orbit changes from elliptical to circular. And we have a cycle of 90,000 years of cold and 10,000 years of warm. We're in one of those warm cycles now. And every 43,000 years, the axis of the Earth changes a little bit. And every 21,000 years, we get a bit of a wobble. Each of those orbital events put us further from the sun. And let's just look at history. The one thing that the climate industry, which it is, ignores is history. In Roman times, it was warm. It was considerably warmer than now. And we know that. They kept good records. They grew olives up the Rhine River as far as Bonn. They had wine grapes in Yorkshire. We know from their clothing that it was warm. Possibly they were going through an orgy, but I think it more likely it was warm. And that warming suddenly stopped in 535 AD. And we entered the Dark Ages. And in 535 AD, we had Krakatoa fill the atmosphere with aerosols. We went into the Dark Ages. It was cool. What happened? Crops failed. We starved. We had civil unrest. We had cannibalism. We broke out of that into the medieval warming. First to feel it was the Vikings. The seas became calmer. They could go further fishing. They actually went to Newfoundland, which they called Vinland. In Greenland, grapes and barley were growing. In Greenland, the graves were deep because there was no permafrost. It was a wonderful, benign climate, 5 degrees warmer than now. Eric the Red was saying, come to Greenland, it's a wonderful climate, and it was. And then we went through a period of solar inactivity. And in 23 years, we went from the medieval warming into the Little Ice Age. And that Little Ice Age ended 330 years ago. So what do you think would happen after a Little Ice Age? Do you think it'd get colder, or do you think it'd get warmer?
Because the elite are largely highly educated and understand the natural cycles taking place on Earth, they understand that any increase or decrease in temperature will scare the highly uneducated population of the Earth towards any means they choose. The expression, "never let a good crisis go to waste," is very applicable here. However, this isn't even a real crisis. The elite understood that the Earth's temperature would change as it has always changed, and if it got any colder or warmer, they could scare the population into thinking something had to be done. You have to give the elite and media credit for having completely brainwashed the American people and much of the world population into believing the only scenario which is normal is to have the temperature remain in a flatline stasis. It is amazing that the population has fallen for such an enormous scam when no temperature change is in fact the least likely scenario to ever occur. There has never been any period in the Earth's history when the temperature remained exactly the same, and expecting that to happen now makes absolutely zero sense. All of these so-called climate scientists should be ashamed of themselves for not telling the public more clearly how volatile the temperature changes have been and will continue to be on Earth. In order to fool people into giving up their blue skies, humanity must be tricked into thinking that their way of life and weather is about to go completely out of control. They are to be fooled into accepting white skies for the rest of their lives as the solution to saving the Earth.
Well, first of all, let me ask you this question, because there's a rumor, I don't know if this is true or not, that some scientists are trying to figure out a way to block the sun to try to slow down global warming.
Yeah, it's a measure of the feeling of desperation that some of them feel.
Are they really thinking they could do that?
Well, some of them are seriously proposing, and I think it's completely nuts.
Yeah.
You know, you put another kind of pollution, sulfur dioxide, up to orbit, cover the atmosphere. The sky won't be really blue in the way it is now anymore.
Is it clear now, or is it becoming clearer, that the best strategy, if you wanted to go to a global scale, would be literally flooding the stratosphere with sulfate particles?
I think the honest answer has to be that we don't know. That you need to do the research in order to have strong opinions about what's the right answer. I would say, you know, if you really put a gun to my head and said, what's the very most likely thing to work right now, that's probably it.
Understand the future. I see the strings to control the system. I can do anything with no resistance, 'cause I can
Self-preservation via fear is the main driving factor contributing to human decision-making. Using the Hegelian dialectic, problem-reaction-solution, humanity can be coaxed and fooled to pretty much any given end. The Hegelian dialectic can be thought of as reverse engineering consent. If your end goal is a militarized white sky being sprayed with airplanes, first you must convince humanity that that is the only way they can be saved. In order to do that, you have to create a danger, an outside force which can only be remedied via spraying the sky. This is why it was so important to create a global warming event in which the only solution is spraying the sky by aircraft. Why is it that the elite and government want the air sprayed so badly? There are a number of reasons, including military applications, commercial applications, and population control objectives. Military applications include, but are not limited to, spraying regions to create increased rainfall, as was done during the Vietnam War, as well as controlling larger weather systems and causing prolonged drought over enemy nations. Commercial applications include the weather derivatives market, in which large-scale weather trends can be changed in order to create enormous profits. Population control objectives include increasing the price of food and causing large-scale disasters, which could kill off millions, if not billions, of people. Because of the very visible nature of aerial spraying programs, the population eventually must be brought into the loop. However, if the population knew the true purposes of these aerial spraying programs, they would never go along with the agenda. That is why it is so important to instill fear and appeal to the most basic human trait of self-preservation in order to get this agenda passed. With an estimated 20% of the U.S. economy directly affected by the weather, and a weather derivatives market in which individuals bet on which large-scale trends will occur, it is very easy for those in the know of weather modification to make trillions of dollars in profit very quickly. In the film Back to the Future, the bad guy Biff eventually gets his hands on the sports almanac. He uses this to increase his wealth. The weather derivatives market being played by influencing large-scale weather trends is a force just as powerful as owning this almanac. It's as if you could change the sports scores as they happened to make money. Having both a weather derivatives market and a large-scale weather modification industry going on is a recipe for disaster.
Geoengineering was considered to be something far off in the distant and really science fiction for most people. Why the urgency now? Why has the debate changed?
I think the debate's changed really because the sort of taboo that we wouldn't talk about it has been broken. So people have actually known you could do these things, for better or for worse, for decades, actually since the 60s.
Oh yeah, later, huh? Right, later. Okay, that was a real rock. I got something to say. I want to know how come the fascist pigs have been seeding the clouds. Right. Last hour and airplanes going over twice with all the smoke coming out of them, seeding the clouds. And I want to know, why that stuff is going down, man. And why doesn't the media report that stuff to the people, man? I'm telling you what happened. The planes come over for an hour and a half and they seeded all the clouds. It's the second time they people of unknown origin were seeding the clouds over the. I don't know what they hope to prove, man.
What's going on here?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I'm coming up here and I'm almost blocked away.
Of course, there are a lot of problems with what they're proposing. It turns out plants need sunlight.
Yes.
Global warming mouthpieces such as David Keith and Al Gore would like the public to believe that geoengineering projects are somehow in the distant future. However, it takes one simply to look at the sky and feel the sunlight to understand they are already taking place.
My heart, you're leaving. Baby, I'm grieving. But if you wanna leave, take good care. Hope you have a lot of nice things to wear. But then a lot of nice things turn bad out there. Ooh, baby, baby, it's a wild world.
What the hell is going on?
It's hard to get by just upon a smile.
David Keith and Al Gore completely ignore the multitude of news reports coming in from around the world reporting that military and commercial airplanes are in fact spraying our air already. How is it possible that two men so in the know about this subject could be so completely oblivious to the fact that this is already occurring under the cover story of chaff?
We've been dealing a lot with some military activity in terms of chaff anyway, and that's something that I experienced for the first time yesterday. That was a whole lot of fun. And that's where the military just basically dumps some of the tiny particles of plastic or metal, mylar, into the atmosphere.
Northern California, we've got a bit of an unusual situation. Now, this first portion of the radar cycle, fairly bland and typical, but then you see these bands of very distinct cloud cover moving into the region. That is not rain, that is not snow, believe it or not. Military aircraft flying through the region is dropping chaff. Small bits of aluminum, sometimes it's made of plastic, or even metallicized paper products, but it's used as an anti-radar issue, and obviously they're up there practicing. Now, they won't confirm that, but I was in the Marine Corps for many years, and I'll tell you right now, that's what it is.
Last weather segment, this is inevitably military or something going on. The government, the Air Force, they send out what's known as chaff, and it's a way to experiment with the radar systems. And when you see this kind of a pattern like this, you can rest assured there's something going on. They're actually little bitty magnetic and little bitty strips of, whether it's aluminum, you know, they change it, but what happens is the radar deflects off of all these little pieces, and they use it actually as a jamming mechanism for radar in warfare, but it can also jam our radar and make rain appear that there really is no rain out there.
And we're looking at mostly cloudy skies, so we have the clouds out there, but not the rain. Well, if you're looking at the radar picture, you're probably saying, well, we have some blue on the radar here. What's that all about if it's not raining out there? Well, believe it or not, this is actually not rain. This is called chaff. This is something that the military actually let out of their aircraft a couple of hours ago. It can be plastic, it can be aluminum, and basically it's something that they emit from the aircraft in order to confuse radar, and it's used in times of war, obviously, but obviously just an experiment here over the Fort Myers area as they release some of that chaff material. So look at the bigger picture. You can see where we have the blues right here. Again, none of this is rain. This is all man-made material. And actually, I want to show you what that looks like when it is released from an aircraft. You see these flares that go out and the smoke that goes with them. Again, these are little flares go out, little heat signatures, or perhaps aluminum that's released from these aircraft in order to confuse any enemy military aircraft from being able to actually use any heat-seeking weapons to find the aircraft. So kind of an interesting thing out there. No known harm to any humans, but nonetheless, just wanted to show you that on the radar picture. And if nothing else, it's actually a great thing that the military has that as an option. Now, look at the radar picture. We have technology that can erase all of that man-made material and show you only the rain. So it is raining right there in the eastern Gulf. We have a lot more rain up to our northwest as well. You can see the showers and storms moving through the panhandle, and these are slowly but surely heading our direction.
Is the public really stupid enough to believe that the military is constantly testing chaff over their heads in an attempt to jam ground-based radar from surface-to-air missiles? Notice how the last news anchor says no known health risks.
So kind of an interesting thing out there. No known harm to any humans, but nonetheless, just wanted to show you that on the radar picture.
Of course, there are health risks from breathing in microparticulate aluminum pieces. Aluminum is linked to Alzheimer's. This military chaff is, of course, a cover story to cover up the aerosol and geoengineering programs using likely aluminum, barium, and strontium. Also of note in this broadcast is the newscaster admits there is software being used to cover up these layers of military spraying taking place in our skies daily and show up as simply nothing.
We have technology that can erase all of that man-made material and show you only the rain.
This proves that these programs are large-scale and happening more often than the American public is told. Because the military does not announce when they are spraying various substances and tests in the air over the American people, it can be easily assumed that these tests are not in fact what we are being told they are. If in fact it is chaff, why are they spraying it over large population centers such as the state of Florida, California, and Oregon, and large cities such as Orlando and San Diego? Obviously, there are human health side effects, and this airspace is not a military testing ground. It is also interesting to note that these weather people admit that chaff is only used during war times. However, there is no war taking place over these population centers in the United States airspace, nor should the public expect to be sprayed with countermeasures and experiments which are used to help block radar signatures. Of course, those in the know realize that this is simply a cover story for the massive geoengineering and other stratospheric aerosol experiments taking place currently.
We have technology that can erase all of that man-made material and show you only the rain.
A BBC hit-piece documentary attempting to cover up the already occurring aerosol spraying program attempts to blame global dimming on carbon dioxide pollution from cars and regular human activity at the surface. The documentary eventually admits the huge impact that airplanes leaving contrails are having. However, the documentary completely ignores the fact that these are not regular contrails and are in fact stratospheric aerosol spraying operations, which have a huge effect on the amount of light reaching the surface of the Earth. Children in elementary school learn how important evaporation is in creating clouds. Without enough UV light reaching the surface of the Earth, regular evaporation will not take place, and rainfall will be greatly reduced. This is a concept so simple that basic elementary school kids can understand it.
What he found stunned him.
Well, I was amazed to find that there was a very serious reduction in sunlight, the amount of sunlight in Israel. In fact, if we compare those very early measurements in the 1950s with the current measurements, there was a staggering 22% drop in the sunlight, and that really amazed me.
Between the 1950s and the early 1990s, the level of solar energy reaching the Earth's surface had dropped. 9% in Antarctica, 10% in the USA, by almost 30% in Russia, and by 16% in parts of the British Isles. This was a truly global phenomenon, and Jerry gave it a suitable name: global dimming. Michael Roderick and Graham Farquhar were intrigued by another paradoxical result: the worldwide decline in something called the pan-evaporation rate.
It's called pan-evaporation rate because it's evaporation rate for a pan.
For decades, nobody took much notice of the pan-evaporation measurements. But in the 1990s, scientists spotted something very strange. The rate of evaporation was falling.
There is a paradox here about the fact that the pan evaporation rate's going down, an apparent paradox, but the global temperatures going up.
This was a puzzle. Most scientists reasoned that, like a pan on the stove, turning up the global temperature should increase the rate at which water evaporated. But Roderick and Farquhar did some calculations and worked out that temperature was not the most important factor in pan evaporation.
Well, it turns out, in fact, that the key things for pan evaporation are the sunlight, the humidity and the wind. But really the sunlight is a really dominant term there.
They found that it was the energy of the photons hitting the surface, the actual sunlight, that kicks the water molecules out of the pan and into the atmosphere.
Because stratospheric aerosol spraying operations have decreased the amount of sunlight reaching the surface of the Earth, and 71% of the Earth is covered in oceans and are the main sources of evaporation and therefore cloud cover, increased droughts should be expected due to stratospheric aerosol spraying geoengineering programs. It is interesting to note that even if the temperature increases, that is not the deciding factor in what causes evaporation. It is in fact sunlight reaching the surface of the Earth which causes evaporation and therefore rain. If much of the ocean is covered in a geoengineering spray blocking out the sunlight reaching the surface of the Earth in the ocean, large-scale droughts should be expected. It is no coincidence that the climate change global warming fearmongers always talk about more drought as a consequence of climate change, when in fact it is their own stratospheric aerosol spraying operations which are causing the increase in drought by reducing the pan rate, which will of course decrease the amount of rain reaching land.
The clouds spread out, trapping heat rising from the surface.
Those clouds can have quite significant warming effects.
The 9/11 study shows that if you remove a contributor to global dimming, jet contrails, just for a 3-day period, we see an immediate response at the surface of temperature. Do the same thing globally, we might see a large-scale increase in global warming.
It is time to stop this stupidity and to help you. There's the NASA photograph last August of the ice cap, the northern ice caps. And there is the NASA photograph this year of the ice caps. It is increased by 60% in 1 year. Leading American scientists are now saying we are going into a period of between 15 and 30 years of global cooling. We may have made one of the biggest, stupidest collective mistakes in history by getting so worried about global warming. You can reverse this in the next 7 or 8 months. You can bring down people's taxes. If you don't, they'll vote on it in the European elections of next year.
Mr Farage shows that populists are sometimes obscurantists. 99% of the science, Mr Farage, believes that this climate change exists as a result of human activity. 99% of scientists. Of course, there are always people that are paid to say the opposite. But to pretend, as you pretend, that against all science, well-established science, that the problem of climate change is just an invention of the Greens or of the left, it's completely nonsense. Of course we have to find a way. Of course we have to find a sensible way to fight climate change. As usual, at the risk of being the pantomime baddie, look, this is happy hour on the funny farm, isn't it? I mean, the fact of the matter is you've got global warming written there in front of you. You know, why was the globe actually warmer 1,000 years ago during the medieval warm period in comparison to what it is now? Why was it warmer 2,000 years ago during the Roman warm period when we were producing wine as far north as Scotland? I mean, come on, the globe hasn't warmed for the past 10 years. It's a scientific fact, it's out there. So look, you know, the European Union is using climate change, it's using global warming to justify its own existence, and poor old Paul McCartney has been duped, I'm afraid. You know, and just to take one thing up with you, Mr Chairman, at the start you said that people who are climate change sceptics are deniers. Now, I'm sorry, being German and all, I'm sure you know the connotations that the term denier has, and I think you should call us sceptics, actually, because we are. And also Mr Macmillan Scott, who said he'd been to the airport to pick up Sir Paul. I mean, it's a bit of a con, isn't it? You know, it's do as I say and not as I do.
There has been no global warming for 15 years. Sea levels are not rising significantly. More and more scientists are rejecting the alarmist case. Earlier this week in this Parliament we heard from Professor Fritz Varenholt. Professor Varenholt has been for decades a German socialist politician and green activist. He has been an environmental regulator, and most recently he was CEO of RWE Renewables. But after a lifetime of environmentalism, he has looked again at the facts and concluded that carbon dioxide is not a significant driver of climate change. I commend to colleagues his important book, The Cold Sun.
Well, I think what's happened here is the government, the Mayor of London, and local authorities, in fact the entire political class, they all so firmly believe in the theories about global warming that they never thought it was going to snow ever again in this country. Well, Mr Barroso, not just you, but the entire unelected government of Europe had a chance perhaps for our citizens to reflect on where the real power lies in this union. I've listened to you for nearly 10 years. Full marks for consistency. You know, you're a man that likes fixed ideology. You probably picked it up when you were a communist or Maoist or whatever you were. And for the last 10 years you've pursued Euro-federalism combined with an increasing green obsession. And yeah, it's been good. For bureaucrats, for big businessmen, for landowners, it's not been a bad decade. But it's been a disaster for poor people, unemployed people and those on low wages. You keep telling us that climate change is an absolute top priority. And you've been greeted with almost hysteria in this place over the last 10 years. Well, those of us that have been sceptical about this have been mocked, derided, called deniers. We've argued from the start that the science wasn't settled, and we've argued very strongly that the measures we're taking to combat what may or may not be a problem are damaging our citizens, and we've been proved to be right.
As we move up in the atmosphere, we could think about whitening clouds by a variety of techniques, and perhaps the most well-known and most talked about solar radiation management technology is the idea of spraying sulfate particles or something similar into the upper layers of the Earth's atmosphere. But if we do enough of that, we could reflect enough incoming solar radiation to reduce the world's average temperature.
Do we know, and Jane, I'll put this to you, I mean, every time you start talking about sending planes up to start spraying sulfites into the upper atmosphere, people start getting a little bit queasy and wonder whether or not it could have unintended consequences on the ecosystem. You know, I come from Australia where we had a little pest, and so in order to get rid of the pest, we introduced the cane toad, and now the cane toad is indestructible. Every time we seem to try to tweak these ecosystems, they turn out to be so much more complicated than anything that we've been able to establish. Do you have confidence?
Yeah, there's an important distinction. So do we have confidence for sure it will work? No, of course not.
But David, I'd love to get you in. Is there any way to sort of quantify this? It's also a bit of a catch-22, isn't it? Because if you're launching all these planes up there to start spraying all these sulfites to cool down the Earth, well, the planes themselves are then also worsening the climate crisis, no?
There's lots of terrible things about this idea, but that actually isn't one of them. A few aircraft and their emissions are really insignificant. I've never heard anybody make that claim seriously.
It's also a bit of a catch-22, isn't it? Because if you're launching all these planes up there to start spraying all these sulfites to cool down the Earth, well, the planes themselves are then also worsening the climate crisis, no?
A few aircraft and their emissions are really insignificant. I've never heard anybody make that claim seriously.
You ever look at those planes up there? They have contrails behind them. Maybe all those planes are the contrails. Maybe they're actually spraying chemicals into the atmosphere right now, and Uncle Sam isn't telling us.
Seems extremely unlikely.
That the United States is not telling something to its citizens? That seems extremely likely to me. Read the newspaper.
And, of course, there are a lot of problems with what they're proposing. It turns out plants need sunlight.
Yes.
Have you gotten some grief for suggesting this?
Sure. I mean, this is like writing a book as the case for leprosy.
Well, first of all, let me ask you this question, because there's a rumor, I don't know if this is true or not, that some scientists are trying to figure out a way to block the sun to try to slow down global warming.
Could an individual start this?
In practice, only a country.
Okay. What about a man in like a hollowed out volcano with henchmen who occasionally shakes his fist at the sky and says, "They said I was a fool at Harvard. Who's the fool now?"
It's All Things Considered from NPR West. I'm Arun Roth. If scientists get the calculations wrong, it could be catastrophic for life on Earth. Or what if the technology got into the wrong hands? Couldn't someone shoot poison into the atmosphere?
So people are terrified about talking about this because they're scared that it will prevent us cutting emissions.
Right, and also that it's sulfuric acid.
It is.
You're bearing the lead. Is there any possible way this could come back to bite us in the ass?
You know, you put another kind of pollution, sulfur dioxide, up to orbit, cover the atmosphere. The sky won't be really blue in the way it is now anymore.
Blanketing the earth in sulfuric acid, because I'm all for it. This is the all-chocolate dinner. I still get to have my CO2, and I just need to spray sulfuric acid.
Right.
All over the earth.
Right. But we put 50 million tons of sulfuric acid in the air now as pollution, and it kills 1 million people a year worldwide.
Okay, and that's good or bad?
It's terrible.
But it'll be better if we put more in. So if it kills 1 million people and we're only doing 1% more, we're just killing 10,000 more people.
You can do math. So killing people is not the objective here.
Killing people, not the objective. I just wanted to be clear. I just wanted to be clear.
Because some very mainstream scientists are saying that the climate change situation is so bad that saving life as we know it might require something radical, like shooting chemicals into the stratosphere to reflect sunlight.
This is the kind of stuff I wake up sweating about. Exactly.
Well, it's your goddamn idea.
No, it actually turns out to be an old idea. This was known since President Johnson, and the scientific community mostly decided not to talk about it.
What happens to the sulfuric acid after it's sprayed? Does it just stay up there?
No, it rains down.
Okay.
But as I said, it rains down.
Okay.
It's a tiny addition. Okay. And you'd put, say, 20,000 tons of sulfuric acid into the stratosphere every year, and each year you have to put a little more, and this doesn't, in the long run, mean that you can forget about cutting emissions. We will need to rein in.
No, we'll get to it eventually, yeah.
But it does.
In the meantime, we're shrouding the earth in sulfuric acid.
So it is that you could actually spray sulfuric acid in the stratosphere 20 kilometers over our head and use that to stop the planet warming up in a kind of ugly tech fix.
You could spray something into the atmosphere to change.
Spray pollution into the atmosphere to stop it warming.
So in the end, pollution saved them all. We owe pollution. We owe acid rain an apology, is what you're saying.
It would be a totally imperfect technical fix.
Okay.
It would have risks. It wouldn't get us out of the long-run need to stop polluting, but it might actually save people and be useful.
The sky won't be really blue in the way it is now anymore.
Kiss me out before you go. Summertime sadness. I just wanted you to know that, baby, you're the best. I got my red dress on tonight, dancing in the dark in the pale moonlight. Done my hair up real big, beauty queen style, high heels off, I'm feeling alive. Oh my God, feel it in the air, telephone wires above, I sizzling like a snare, honey, I'm on fire, I feel it everywhere, nothing scares me anymore. Kiss me out before you go. Summertime sadness. just wanted you to know that, baby, you're the best. I got that summertime, summertime sadness. Got that summertime, summertime sadness. Got that summertime, summertime sadness. I'm feeling electric tonight, cruising down the coast, going about 99. Got my bad baby by my heavenly side. I know if I go, I'll die happy tonight. Oh my God, I feel it in the air, telephone wires above. I seize it like a snare, honey, I'm on fire. I feel it everywhere, nothing scares me anymore. Kiss me out before you go. Summertime sadness. I just wanted you to know that, baby, you're the best. I got the summertime, summertime sadness. Got that summertime, summertime sadness. Got that summertime, summertime sadness. Oh, oh, oh. Kiss me out before you go. Summertime sadness. I just want